There we go. That should be better.
It's a little better, yeah, it
Oh,
is.
yeah, that sounds better. Sounds much better. Okay, so we are live now, Rod, and people are not yet seeing us. We're just dealing with the frequent, but at this point we would have to say typical internet bandwidth problems that often plague these independent broadcasts. But I am really, really pleased, and I would ask the Crowdsource the Truth audience to join me in welcoming back an extremely important guest. We have retired Washington, D.C. Metro PD homicide detective Rod Wheeler with us. Rod, thank you so much for joining me.
For inviting me. Yeah, opportunity to spend some time with your viewers, Jason.
Yeah, and we are having a little bit of an internet connection thing, but let's roll with this and see how it goes. Rod, I think most people watching know that you are, as we said, a retired homicide detective, and most notably in this matter, you were hired on behalf of the Seth Rich family to conduct an independent investigation. And of course, viewers can follow you on Twitter. You are there at Rod Wheeler, and you remain active in investigations and law enforcement. You've worked with Homeland Security. You were a food safety inspector in part of your career, and you met with me and George Webb very early, about a year and a half ago, something like this, and we discussed the case. Shortly after that, you were basically gagged by a civil lawsuit brought against Fox News and you. You were essentially thrown under the bus. They said you said things that you didn't say and got you all roped up in this legal matter. Can you give us a little overview for maybe people who were not following or confused by that? What exactly happened?
Yes, you kind of broke up there, but I think I got the essence of what you were trying to say. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes.
This was a case, obviously it was the Seth Rich case, where I was brought in to conduct the investigation in reference to the murder of Seth Rich. And I was brought in by the family of Seth Rich. I started the murder investigation, and one thing led to actually getting to finding out some things pertaining to that particular murder. But at a certain point in the investigation, an abrupt halt as a result of some media information that went out. Actually, I gave an interview to the local Fox 5 in DC, and the way that the reporter exploited that interview really left a pretty bad taste, if you will, with the Rich family. And so they asked me at that point to discontinue the investigation.
And this was Malia Zimmerman, right?
I'm sorry?
That was Malia Zimmerman was the Fox News reporter who was the cause of that, right? Yeah.
Right. Local Fox 5 reporter, Marina Morocco, in the local DC area, that with that story, for Malia Zimmerman's story was published the following day. The Fox 5 reporter really exploited the story to make it an exclusive. She wasn't supposed to do, but she did. And the story that Malia Zimmerman wrote actually was published the following day. Story that actually of quotes that I did not say, but that was the essence, if you will, of the Malia Zimmerman and Fox News.
I apologize to viewers that we are having a little bit of internet slowdown in this emerging world of high definition video over the internet. It's an ongoing development towards perfection. But so Marina Morocco was the local Fox 5 reporter. Now, so Rod, the case has been dismissed. What can you tell us about that? You've been vindicated, of course.
Well, the case was dismissed today by Judge Daniels, who was a federal judge up in the state of New York. And, I kind of understand what the judge was saying. I actually read through the entire, what he said in the case, as far as, why he reached the conclusion. I kind of disagree with his findings, although I do respect the order of the court, and I always have, being in law enforcement. But I've never had any animosity, Jason, towards Fox News. The problem, or the beef, if you will, that I had for Malia Zimmerman and Ed Butowski, who actually fabricated some of the quotes. Here's something that's really interesting, and I think your listeners and your viewers are going to find that investigation, any murder investigation, regardless of the political extremities or politically, if you let the investigators do the investigation, it may actually benefit these people that have political motivations. I don't know if this case or not, but I do believe that if I were to have been able to continue this investigation, I would have been able to uncover some things would have been happy about, including the Rich family. Why do I say that? And I'll tell you why I say that. I actually believe, Jason, I was getting very close to something in this investigation. Now, your listeners and your viewers may be saying, well, what was that something? I don't know what that something is. And sometimes as an investigator, you can feel it when you're getting close to something. Why? Because you start getting pushback from certain individuals. You come to find out certain things they should not know. And
right.
In this particular case, and I hope you can hear me okay, but in this particular case, there was one individual, and I don't think here tonight because I'd probably wind up getting another lawsuit tomorrow. But there was one individual, Jason, that really concerned me in this investigation. The person knew a little bit too much than they should have known with regards to the death of Seth Rich.
Right.
But I've listened to this person on various media channels and network channels, and I've always said to myself, how did this person know that? And as an investigator, they'll tell you the same thing. That's one of the things we listen for, and that's one of the things that we look for when a person starts saying regarding a case that they really should not have known unless they were involved.
Right, of course. And I could speculate about who you're thinking of, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to cause you to discuss anything that makes you uncomfortable. I do want to take you back, Rod, to our first meeting in 2017, where you spoke to us about the fact that there was no autopsy report, no ballistics, no death certificate. You categorized these as things that simply never happened. And that has caused me to believe that this whole entire matter of the murder is in question. There's body camera footage that's gone missing. You yourself were instructed by associates at the DC Metro Police not to proceed with the investigation. There have been whispers that people high up in the DNC took action to halt the investigation. And of course, in the WikiLeaks emails that were released, John Podesta says that Eric Braverman is the leaker. He makes no mention of Seth Rich. So for many months now, I have been saying that based on evidence, I personally doubt that Seth Rich is in fact dead. Dr. Corsi shared with me the information that Seth Rich had been employed, as I'm sure you're aware, by Greenberg, Quinlan, and Rosner, the opposition research firm, which you are a longtime resident and former police officer there in Washington, D.C. I'm sure you're very familiar with the activities of these opposition research firms. What do you think about any of that?
Anything is possible. I've looked at that. I can tell you that I honestly believe that Seth Rich is dead. I looked at the 214. That's what we call it here in DC, the PD 214. That's the face sheet of any response that you see. You have to do a PD 214. I actually saw that, and that indicates that this was a homicide. I don't think they would create or generate J14 and get a case number, which we call a CCN, if in fact there was not a body there. I mean, that would be very difficult.
That would be difficult.
I do believe he was killed. I'm sorry.
That would be difficult to generate that PD 214 if there was no murder.
Yeah, it's crime at all. I mean, Pete is step one in any police response. I mean, you got to do a face sheet. We like to call it a face sheet. You got to do that. It's very difficult to generate that case or without a murder, because you'd have to kind of create the whole scenario and all that. And I just don't believe that. So I do believe he's dead. I also
Let me
believe,
pause
some
you for a
reason, I've
second.
said before.
Sorry, let me just pause you for a second and let's stay on that PD 214. So this is a handwritten document that
Yep.
someone in the DC Metro Police would fill out.
That's right.
What would stop an officer from just doing that in his office and submitting it with nobody?
Yeah, it's kind of impossible to do that. Here's why. When you it's a face sheet. It's the initial sheet on every crime that's committed within the District of Columbia. You have to do a P214. On that face sheet, up in the corner, there's a box for what we call a CCN number. CCN in DC stands for Criminal Complaint Number. N number. You get that from the dispatcher. So unless the dispatcher was in cahoots with the officer, there's no 14 without the dispatcher knowing about it, without it coming across the radio. So it's kind of impossible to do that. You can't even, unless the dispatcher is aware of what you're doing, because the case number, the CCN, that comes from.
Okay, Rod, let me try something real quick that I hope will improve our internet performance. I wonder if I disable my camera going to you, perhaps that will give us more bandwidth to concentrate on you talking to us. I hope that won't be distracting for you, but we'll try and improve the signal a bit. So, okay, so you're basically saying that it could not be done. Wow, I'm getting some slowdown here on my end, just in the apartment. That's interesting. There's a lot of people who possibly don't want you and I to speak to each other about this, but I get what you're saying. This would be what I am proposing and speculating about is highly irregular. But if, for instance, and I'm not talking about the DC Metro PD, but if, for instance, we had a police department within which corruption existed, and let's say the chief of police, who at the time was a woman named Kathy Lanier, who, if I recall correctly, you were in the police academy with.
Right, she was there at the same time I was there.
Right. And then she abruptly left her position as the chief of police shortly after this alleged murder took place. She now has a very lucrative position as the head of security at the National Football League. Is it conceivable that in a hypothetical situation where the chief of police were controlling an investigation? I mean, we've seen tons of impropriety in the Las Vegas Metro PD department with respect to their investigation of the October 1st shooting. I'm not trying to force you into an answer. I'm just going down this road of speculation because there's so much about police procedure that the average civilian knows nothing about.
Right. Well, I think that's a fair question for anyone to answer. Here's my response to that. I do know Kathy Lanier, and I've known her for years, and all I can say is that she's always been an upstanding person to me. I would find it hard to believe with the slightest that Kathy would ever be involved in anything like this. Kathy is a person of character, and I just can't believe that, and I don't think I would ever believe she would be involved in any kind of cover-up whatsoever. I think it's good that she was able to get another job with the NFL. But I also believe, real quickly, Jason, that Kathy herself has some reservations about some of the politics in the nation's capital. Now, I just believe that. I don't know that for sure.
Right.
But I think she's a lot from her position. And I think she has some reservations. And I think one reason she left, I believe, is because she didn't want to be around some of this politics that was going on here in the nation's capital.
Right. And I mean, again, I'm just looking at some of the other things that have gone on. There's a question here in the comments about this shot spotter technology. And I recall from our first conversation that you said it's hit or miss, essentially.
Yep.
Sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't work well. So, in my view, that makes it sort of unreliable. What do you think?
Well, the shot spotter technology worked that particular night, from what I understand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the initial call, as a matter of fact, of the shooting as a result of the shot spotter technology. I'm not even sure if they received additional calls from individuals in the area, but from what I learned from my investigation, the shot spotter technology is where the police department, our communications division, received the initial call. So I believe it worked. And I do believe the shot spotter technology works very well. The only time, real quickly for your listeners and your viewers, Jason,
Yeah.
the only time that you have a concern about the shot spotter not catching something or catching something inaccurately, sometimes if there's a backfire from a car or an
Right.
automobile or something like that, sometimes that can throw you off a little bit, because sometimes that'll come across the shot spotter as
Right.
being a gunshot when in fact it's not. One other thing, real quickly, sometimes firecrackers can
Right.
set off a shot spotter as well. I don't
Right.
think either one of those were the case that night. I actually believe it was gunshots that went to, unfortunately, that went to Seth Rich.
Right, right. So, of course, the shot spotter is an audio detection system, so a sound that is similar to a gunshot could fool it. Uh,
Sure.
you know, the things that I'm thinking about, Rod, is we've learned so much since July 10th, I think it was, 2016, when this incident took place. And we see people like Peter Strzok, who are, in the FBI, but there's questions about, does this guy have a CIA background? Is he part of some joint force between the CIA and the FBI? And of course, since September 11th, there's been a lot of commingling between local law enforcement authorities and some of the three-letter agencies like the FBI and the CIA under the pretense of collaborating to prevent incidents. But we've also learned that some of these relationships can lead to maybe inappropriate capabilities for some of these agencies. And I mean, I know I'm getting off into the area of speculation, but there was just so much improper and unusual procedure with this Seth Rich matter. I just wonder if there wasn't some more powerful agency inserted into the DC Metro Police to sort of stave everybody off. Yourself, Kathy Lanier, perhaps this dispatcher. I mean, who knows what level of influence someone like that within the local police could exert.
It's a fair observation on your part, Jason. I think it would have to be considered a fair observation. Why? Because you're 100% correct. That all along, that there's something going on in our nation's capital that makes me feel uneasy. And why do I say that? Look, I've been in DC for 25 years. Been in this town a long time. I know the politics of DC. I know the law enforcement of DC, and I know how law enforcement works here. It bothers me, and it bothered me initially when I first got involved in this case. Matter of fact, I challenge your viewers and your listeners, if you go back to March of 2017, this was right when the Rich family brought me in on this case. I did a local story on the local Fox 5 at their studio. And I told them back in March of 2017, this is before I even really started the investigation, that initially I wasn't getting the right answers from people about what happened to Seth Rich. And it was troubling to me, because I said to myself, and I actually said this on the air, it's still on the internet if you want to look it up. I said there's some kind of underground organization operating within the city I'm unaware of, but I could sense it, I could feel it, I couldn't put my hands on it. And then that's when I started this investigation. So that's why I say your observations are 100% spot on. Is it possible? Absolutely, it's possible that some other organization, be it the federal government, the DNC, someone could have been involved with this case and other cases that I think, I think the president now is really taking a close look at a lot of these things, to be honest.
Right. Right, and of course, we've seen things like Imran Awan, who was suspected of hacking Congress. The man gets arrested at Dulles Airport and charged with bank fraud, a relatively minor charge for which he's given this plea arrangement where he's completely absolved of any and all nonviolent crimes that he's committed in his entire life up until July 3rd, 2018, simply for pleading guilty to this one count of bank fraud, which he will almost certainly never do any prison time for. No exchange of information with the Department of Justice or the U.S. Attorney's Office. In your experience as a police officer, have you ever seen a plea arrangement like that?
Well, it depends. And again, I think that's another interesting observation on your part. We don't really know, Jason, what all he shared with the authorities.
Right.
We know what happened, what the outcome was of his particular case. But I wouldn't be so quick to jump to a conclusion that he did not share information with the authorities. I mean, but without having 100% knowledge about what's going on with the Mueller investigation,
Right.
I've seen a couple of things over the past few days that has really kind of raised an eyebrow. And I'm thinking to myself, why are they starting to look at certain things? These were things that were related to Hillary Clinton and Podesta, which I think is really interesting. So let's not jump to the conclusion that he did not, meaning Awan, he did not share any information, because we really just don't know.
Can you elaborate on some of those things that they've been talking about relative to the Mueller investigation and Hillary Clinton?
Well, I just saw it on the news over the past couple of days where there's been some more inquiries pertaining to some of the emails that went out from Hillary Clinton, or that were supposedly hacked by the DNC, and why certain things did not happen. I think my point is, if we continue to follow that case closely, I think we're going to see, as time goes on, more and more, and we're going to learn more and more information about things that we don't know about right now. I guess I can put it like that.
Sure, sure. And it's interesting, Rod, your career as a homicide detective, you were dealing with, pretty gritty situations, people getting shot, stabbed, killed in all kinds of different ways. Did you ever imagine that you'd be doing so much investigation relative to emails? It's kind of crazy.
No, of course not. When it comes to a murder, it could be anything. I never imagined, though, Jason, that I would be, reeled into a political thing such as I was with the Seth Rich case.
Right.
And that's really unfortunate, because I know very well, and you and I have talked for a period of time now, my focus has always been who killed Seth Rich. I don't care about your political persuasion or what you believe or the collusion or any of that. Who killed Seth Rich? That's my question today. Who killed Seth Rich? That's all I want to know. Now, if it leads to other things, then that's fine. Right now, who killed him, and why hasn't this case been solved? Because I honestly believe, even to this day, and this is going to be startling probably to some of your listeners, but even to this day, I believe this case can be solved with two pieces of information that I almost had my hands on, but I was stopped right before I got that information.
Can you tell us any more about that? You believe the case could be solved with just two pieces of information. Can you say anything about
do.
that?
No, things that I was just about ready to get. Right before they put the brakes on me.
Right.
And that really bothered me more than anything. This is pertaining to the murder investigation. And I really was trying hard to get these two pieces of information, which I think would crack this case. And it disturbs me that the police department hasn't gotten these things. Maybe they have gotten them and it didn't show anything. But I'll tell you right now, if I had access to these information, I would bet you a ham sandwich that I could crack this case.
That would have to be a ham sandwich at Art and Soul, which incidentally I've been to on your recommendation. It is very good. So now wait a minute. I don't want to draw you out into saying anything you don't want to say, but I recall from our earlier conversation, were they pieces of information or actual items? I recall you were looking for Seth Rich's laptop and cell phone, and it was a lot of sort of disinformation thrown your way as to who had it and where it was.
Sure. Yeah, that was true.
Are those the two items?
I'm not saying, no, I'm not saying that at all.
Okay.
Those are the two items.
Got it.
All I'm saying is there's two pieces of information that if I could see tomorrow, if I could get my hands on these two pieces of information, I think I could solve this case. I really do, but
Wow.
I don't think I'll ever see it anytime soon.
Interesting, interesting. Let me take you back to some of the political stuff that you were talking about, because of course we've been discussing this in the context of you being hired for the Rich family. But of course, the Rich family weren't the ones who actually did the hiring. It's now come out that it was Ed Butowski who hired you. Is that correct? Can you discuss that?
Well, the Rich family actually signed the contract to bring me on board to conduct a murder investigation on their behalf.
Right.
But it was Ed Butowski who bill for my service.
I mean, isn't that pretty unusual, Rod, that Ed Butowski's not related to the Rich family? Why would this seemingly disinterested third party be hiring you or paying you to conduct a murder? What is Ed Butowski's interest in Seth Rich?
You know, I have an opinion, and I really don't want to give my opinion right now. Not quite yet. Even though the case has been dismissed, my lawsuit's been dismissed, and his lawsuit against Fox has been dismissed, I really would hold off on giving my opinion about that until the murder is solved. But all I can say is that people have different motivations as to why they get involved with different things. And I'll tell you this. Ed Butowski has been saying for the longest, the reason he has a bleeding heart, you know, for people that lose their children in such a tragic way.
Uh-huh.
This is what he's saying. And that's why he got involved. All right, let's say that's true. Halfway through my investigation, real quickly, there was a woman that was killed in Southeast DC by some drug boys having a shootout.
Right.
She was in a wheelchair. And I asked Butowski then, I said, Ed, since you have such a bleeding heart, can we offer some money so I hurt her as well? He said, no, I can't help with everybody's case.
Right.
You see what I mean? So there you go.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. If someone were a millionaire or a billionaire who made this their, you know, sort of life's work and hobby, I imagine you could just look at any police docket or whatever it is anywhere in any major city every day and go broke paying for private investigators to, what about Vince Foster? What about all these other unsolved murders?
Sure.
So that doesn't hold a lot of water with
it
me.
was this case. Why this case?
Yeah, it's very strange to me. And Ed Butowski, of course, Rod, you and I had a conversation when I had heard a recording that Mr. Butowski put on the internet of a conversation you were having with him on the phone that to me was quite obviously edited. I could hear differences in the audio noise, cut and change abruptly. And Ed Butowski put this out as some sort of evidence of a conversation with you. So beyond what you've just said, which makes good logical sense, it doesn't make sense to me that Ed Butowski would hire a private investigator and then essentially manufacture false evidence to sort of make that investigator look, you know, bad or whatever it is he was trying to do, get you involved in lawsuits. What can you say about any of that?
You know, it's just bizarre. It's unfortunate. I definitely regret. I regret even returning his telephone call when he first called me in February of 2017, Jason. You know, it really destroyed a whole lot for me. But it is what it is. One other thing, too, that I think is very important to mention, since we're talking about Ed Butowski. About a month and a half ago, this year, Ed Butowski went to one of these news outlets and he said, I think it was Big League Politics or one of them, and he said that he learned back in 2016 from Seth Rich's father, Joel, that even Joel said that they knew what his son had did in terms of giving these emails to WikiLeaks. Remember a month and a half ago, Butowski said Joel Rich told him that back in 2016. Well, here's what's interesting, and I know your listeners are going to find this very interesting. Butowski never told me that. I never knew that. Now, if I'm the investigator that he supposedly is paying to do this investigation, why wouldn't he share with me what the father of the decedent told him? You know when I learned about this? When I heard it on the news a month ago. That's crazy. And that ought to tell you something in and of itself. I actually asked Ed about that recently. He's been calling me, harassing me.
Oh, really?
And I asked him recently, I said, yeah, I said, Ed, why didn't you tell me this information that you had from Joel Rich about him saying he knew what his son had did? He said, I can't tell you everything.
It's so weird. It just makes kind of like no sense at all, Rod. I mean, imagine if you're shelling out lots of money or whatever the amount is, if you want to solve the case, you're going to give all the information you have to the person that you've selected to investigate it. Now, the other weird thing that Ed Butowski, well, I shouldn't say the other, but one of the other weird things that Ed Butowski was connected to was this audio recording of Cy Hirsch talking about FBI contacts and talking about Seth Rich. Now, here's an article written by Cassandra Fairbanks, which is interesting. But, you know, Cy Hirsch in that audio recording, I was immediately suspicious of it because I heard it in close time correlation to hearing the audio recording of you, which quite obviously to me was edited. Now, that introduced the possibility in my mind that Ed Butowski might also edit an audio recording of Cy Hirsch. And perhaps with Cy Hirsch, he had the advantage of recording the whole entire spoken segment in the same setting, so edits might be less obvious. The recording I heard of you seemed to come from two separate conversations, maybe two different phone calls, different background noise, different quality to the phone connection, whatever. But the possibility exists that if you record a person in a restaurant in one given sitting, you might be able to snip up parts of the conversation and shift them around, drop things out here or there, and change the context of what the person is saying. I was so intrigued by this that I actually went to meet with Cy Hirsch. And Cy Hirsch told me that the recording was not representative of what he had said, that he didn't know it was being recorded, and he was having a few cocktails while they were having the conversation. So it's not the same as Cy Hirsch going on, you know, naming the shows, CNN, 60 Minutes. I'm not saying I trust those shows. I'm just saying that's an official appearance by Cy Hirsch where he knows the words that he's saying will be broadcast to a large audience. So Ed Butowski seems to be wanting to introduce all this conflicting information into the investigation, and then he's also somehow, I'm not sure how, seems to be associated with you know, these guys that had the press conference, and I'm talking now about Jack Berkman and America First Media, who they're telling me as of today, they've had a falling out. Do you have any information about Jack Berkman and what his involvement in this investigation is, or what his role here is?
No, and the only thing I know about Jack Berkman, see a long time. You know, he's somebody that a lot of folks know in the D.C. area. He's an attorney. Jack reached out to me maybe a year and a half ago pertaining to this case. Spoke with him, but that's the only thing I can tell you about him. As far as America First Media is concerned, I think, you know, some of the folks like Frank Whalen and a couple of others, they're pretty legitimate guys. They really are. Frank Whalen is a former New York investigator, and he's very legitimate. And I think their heart's in the right place as long as they continue to dig and as long as they can keep the politics out of it. I think right now they're probably on the right track.
I don't mean to disagree with you while you're a guest on my show, but in my evaluations of Frank Whalen, I find him to be totally incompetent and prone to openly stating false information as if it's true. He accused me in a public internet forum of lying. He said I never spoke to Jack Berkman, and earlier today I published the phone call where I did speak to Jack Berkman. Frank Whalen also, at that press conference, referred to the Cy Hirsch phone conversation and considered that an element of evidence in this matter. So I'm not so sure about Frank Whalen. I don't think he has very good investigative skills at all. And I don't think that America's First Media investigation has really advanced this very much. We have this new witness, Luke Anon. Have you heard anything that Luke has had to say, and what do you think about that? Did a DEA agent and an ATF agent shoot Seth Rich?
Yeah, I watched the press conference that they had at the Marriott Hotel here in the D.C. area, Yeah, I really have no thoughts on that one way or the other. I listened to it. I don't know who this guy Luke is. It's a witness that they developed, and hopefully they'll continue to work on that witness to get more credible information, Jason. But I really don't know much about this witness. Here's the thing: with that witness, Luke, or any witness, my question has always been, why isn't the police department, the trained investigators that we have here in D.C., why haven't they interviewed these people? If
Right.
this Luke guy has this information, and let's say he does, and if
Right.
he's legitimate, why isn't the detectives that's well trained here in DC, why aren't they talking to this guy?
Right.
I don't know. That's the only question.
Yeah, it's
Because at the end of
definitely
the day, it's not going to be America's first media, and it's not going to be Jack Berkman that's going to have to charge someone for this murder. It's going to be the DC police.
right.
So with everything that I did, for example, everything, and you know this, I think I told you this a year ago, everything I did, every slither of information I got, my first call was to who? The DC Police Department, because it's them that has to get the warrant for the arrest.
Right. And of course, I would imagine, your experience there, you must still have friends, associates, people that you know. You're obviously going to have more access to the DC police than, somebody living in Arkansas conducting an investigation through a Slurpee. Probably, I would assume.
Was that
Anyway, sorry, enough of that. Now, I've got some questions here. The boy 26, who has frequently got very good comments, he's saying that he believes you, of course, but he's curious why there's no EMS report that would include police officers on the scene and a transfer of care to the hospital that night. Was that something that you ever came across in your investigation, an EMS report?
Well, we talked about this when you
Yeah.
interviewed me about a year ago. That's always been a concern of mine. Where is the report? There has to be a report. Look, there's a report. Now, we haven't been able to see the report for whatever reason. There is a report. But here's a better question for your viewer there. Where, and I think I mentioned to you, is for the lookout for the shooting. There's audio for every shooting for a lookout. Trust me.
Right.
And as you and I know, Seth Rich did not die right away.
Right.
He was alive when he was transferred to the hospital. So the cop in this country would do when they get on the scene of a shooting is ask the victim, what did the suspects look like?
Right.
Why? Because you get that out on the radio, Jason, and trust me, and the officers, the police officers that's listening to you now and listening to me, they know this is 100% accurate, right?
Basic training.
Officers on the street come across the radio to the officers on the scene saying, hurry up and give us a lookout.
Right.
We don't all respond to we're in the area. We haven't been able to hear the lookout for the suspects. Even if Seth Rich said it was two males with hoodies on and that's all I know, that's fine. Where is that audio?
Right.
Haven't heard it.
And the lookout, of
That's
course,
correct.
is the victim would tell the officers on the scene, two males in blue hoodies or whatever, and if another unit around town sees two guys in blue hoodies, they're going to stop them and say, hey, what's up? And they got blood on their
Exactly.
shoes, and you
Can
might
I-
have the murderer right there. Sorry?
Can I share this with you?
Please do. Please.
Remember when a police officer in New York City was killed in her vehicle and her
Yes.
partner was next to her on the driver's side?
Yes.
She was sitting about a year ago. She was ambushed. Remember some nutcase walked up and just ambushed her and killed her?
Yes.
If you listen to the audio, the first thing the officer that was in the vehicle did was give a lookout of the suspect. And that, I just say that as an example. This is how it works with any police department. Officers on the street, if you remember, they arrested the suspect 2 streets away based on the lookout that was given from the officer that was in the vehicle with the officer that was killed. So I just say that as an example, just so that your viewers and your listeners understand this is how it works in any police department, not just here in DC. Why haven't we heard about the lookout?
Yeah, and it just goes back to the primary question, which is why are there so many unusual anomalies in this investigation, so many missing pieces, which is why I keep coming back to the main question of, is there someone of some shocking level of power who who has intervened to prevent this investigation from happening in a normal fashion at the most basic level. It's just fascinating. So have you had, obviously the Rich family is not speaking with you anymore. No one is conducting this investigation at all. How can they possibly be satisfied with no investigation from the DC Metro PD, no information about who killed their son? They seem more interested in suppressing the investigation and calling any speculation about what could have happened a conspiracy theory and suing people about it.
I don't know. I haven't had any conversations with the Rich family, obviously, since I was told to cease and desist the investigation. I do feel horrible, though, for the Rich family, because I do think there has been some stuff in the media that has really caused them a lot of anguish and a lot of harm. And it's unfortunate. Things that's been said that really should not have been said about their son. You know, people coming out with some conspiracy theories and things like that. I just wish them well. Joel Rich and Mary Rich are dynamic people. I know them. I've met them. They're really sweet people. They really are. And I think they really want this case solved. The only regret that I have, and I don't know if I should say this or not, is when I spoke with Fox 5, the local Fox, the night before that article came out. You know, I didn't know that reporter was going to run with that story like that. And the Rich family, according to them. But that very next morning, I got on the phone and called Joel Rich and apologized. So, you know, I just wish the best for them. And I hope that they can find the person or people who's responsible for their son's death.
Of course. And you know, there's some interesting things that I've learned since our first conversation as well, Rod. I've been over to the DNC office and I found it so strange that they have this bike rack there which is dedicated to Seth Rich. Now, I mean, the story is he rode his bike to work every day, so they dedicated a bike rack to him, which seems a little weird, but it's the inscription is beyond bizarre. It says, "This bike rack is dedicated to Seth Rich, son of Omaha, fierce fighter for voting rights, devoted Democrat, friend to all, including Panda, who left us too soon." And the capitalization is quite weird. So many of the words are capitalized, but then some aren't. And it's just bizarre. Did we ever find out what this panda connection is? He's just a 27-year-old guy who likes pandas so much that they put it on his death-dedicated bike rack?
Yeah, that's as far as I know. I haven't heard much at all about, you know, the connection with Panda, other than the fact that he loves panda bears and Panda. I think that was a nickname he used or something.
That's so weird. It's so weird. And was there anything that came up with regard to Eric Braverman when you were doing your investigation or subsequent to?
No, not at all with regards. I hadn't got to that point. I don't know if something worked virtually, but up to the point in which I was told to stop the investigation, Jason, there was nothing pertaining to Eric Braverman.
I see. Okay. And so, as far as you know, the civil legal suits related to this matter are done. You're out of the woods with that, and everything is copacetic from that standpoint.
Yeah, it is. The case was dismissed. Like I said, I respect the judge's decision. I kind of understand his reasoning for making his decision. Again, I just hope that the family of Seth Rich are able to get closure at some point for this case. I think they will eventually, but I think it's going to take some time. But I do think they're going to get closure at some point.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, I don't understand why they would be suing if all they wanted was for people to sort of stop investigating or whatever. But why? This is what I wanted to ask you, Rod. Why was this happening in the Southern District of New York? If you live in Washington, D.C., and Seth was murdered in D.C., is Fox headquartered in New York? Is that why?
I think that's the reason. Yeah, Fox headquarters is in New York, on 6th Avenue, and I think that's why the attorneys decided to file in New York versus in the D.C. area.
But isn't that kind of strange? I mean, sorry?
Really, it kind of makes sense because you kind of want to file in an area where the defendant's going to be. So in this case, it would be the Southern District of New York, which is New York. So it kind of makes sense that they would file there.
But it's strange to me a little bit because what I find is that plaintiffs usually want to file in a jurisdiction that's convenient to them so that the expense of, traveling or dealing with lawyers is borne by the target of the lawsuit. Like you may or may not know that I am the subject of 2 frivolous civil federal suits, and in both cases, the unscrupulous plaintiffs have selected jurisdictions that are outside of New York. So I'm just curious about that. And we hear about a lot of things going on in the Southern District of New York. Robert Mueller has referred John or Tony Podesta to the Southern District of New York. I wonder if there's not someone, if the Southern District of New York is not some sort of legal black hole that you just send cases to that need to be handled with special care.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know enough about, there or on the federal level anywhere. Usually, though, it's where the harm occurred,
Right.
or originated. So in my particular lawsuit and in these other lawsuits, Fox is obviously in New York. So you would consider that's the place where the harm occurred as a result of where the defendant is.
Got it.
And I don't know enough about the federal court side to say whether or not, there's any special care or anything like that. I just don't know, Jason.
Okay. Well, something interesting for people to
But what I do,
speculate about. Yes.
but what I do know, is that this murder can be solved. I keep saying that for a reason. It can be solved.
Do you think there's any hope?
I'm sorry, you broke up there.
Do you think there's any hope that it will be solved? I mean, the DC Metro Police, it's a closed matter, isn't it?
No, it's still an open case, and they still have detectives assigned to it. And I'm hoping, and there's always hope. I hope it can get solved sooner than later, but I know it can be solved. It can be solved.
Is there anything that the viewers could do to, obviously within the bounds of what is legal, I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything other than what's completely legal. Is there anything that viewers can do to encourage the DC Metro Police or provide information? There's so many cameras in stores and body cameras on the cops. Like, they have to be not investigating because someone has told them not to.
I don't know, Does it sound like I'm kind of skating around your question?
No.
You're right.
These are unanswerable, really.
They are. I don't know. But what I do know, based on my experience and from what I've learned up to this point pertaining to that death, is that this case can be solved. Look, there's over $150,000 worth of reward money out for information pertaining to this case and, the individuals responsible for this death. Mm-hmm. Many, many years investigating murders. Not just me. You can ask any homicide detective in this country. They'll tell you money always brings in someone, especially when it's a street robbery or a street crime. Right. It always does. And look, 25,000 will bring someone in.
Right.
150,000 and nobody's told is wrong. That's unusual. You talk about what's unusual. That's very unusual. Right. When that happens, then that means that there's another reason why this person was killed. Folks on the street don't know who killed this guy. Right. The guy, look, I went down into various parts of DC Northwest talking to some of the guys on the street. That's what you do as a detective. They didn't even know about this guy. And then a lot of folks say, well, how much money are they asking? I'll try to find out. I can't find out because they don't know, because it wasn't, his death was not the result of somebody on the street walking up to him to steal his watch that they didn't take and killing him.
Right, because if it's gang activity, absolutely. If it's gang activity, someone somehow connected to the gang, somebody's little brother, somebody's girlfriend, somebody's uncle, something is going to know what happened and go get that 150 grand. And that didn't occur.
Every time.
People are asking a lot of questions about other matters, the Las Vegas shooting, things that are probably outside the scope of things that you've investigated. People are curious to know if you think that MS-13 was connected to this at all.
It's hard to say, but I don't believe so. Anything is funny, just make sure that's clear.
Yeah.
The murder, unsolved. So anytime you have an unsolved murder, anything is possible. Okay. So you don't want to rule anything out. Now,
Right.
do I think MS-13 was involved? It's always possible. One reason why it could be possible is because not far from there, 14th and Park Avenue, the north west side of DC, is not far from where Seth was killed. There's a lot of MS-13 activity in that area, so it's not far from where a lot of these gang members be. So it is possible. Do I think it happened as his death happened as a result of that? I don't think so, but it is possible.
I mean, it's
Anything is
certainly
possible. Remember that.
right, but
Anything
it's
is
certainly
possible until the
But it certainly goes back to your previous comment where, I mean, MS-13 is a gang, and somebody in the gang might be like, hey, let's get this 150 grand. Or certainly in the 2 years that have transpired since then, I would imagine that, interactions among gang members are sort of volatile and, people fall out of favor and you get flipped and turned into the cops, particularly if there's 150 grand at stake. There's a lot that could go on that as time goes on and no one from MS-13 or with knowledge of MS-13 comes forward, it would seem to eliminate or reduce that possibility. Rod, has anybody from or related to WikiLeaks contacted you at all during the course of the investigation or the time since?
No, they haven't, Jason.
Julian Assange is not Twitter DMing you? It's disappointing.
Not at all.
But people can follow you on Twitter, Rod. You're there at Rod Wheeler, and you are very accessible. People can message you on Twitter. What have you been doing since the investigation ended? I understand you've been dabbling in an acting career. Is that correct?
No, I mean, I've talked to a couple of casting studios about doing some crime-related shows and things like that, and I'm still talking to a couple of them. I do a lot of investigations as far as product tampering, food tampering, things like that as well. And I still consult with individuals on their own individual cases, families of decedents and things like that. There's 2 other cases that I'm looking at here in the United States that I can't mention, that I'm looking at. They're suicide cases that doesn't really look like suicide cases. They look like they were homicides. And they're in small communities. And so I'm looking at whether or not these were cover-ups. Basically, that's what I've been doing. Haven't had any more involvement, though, Jason, with the Seth Rich case whatsoever, and probably won't unless the family asks me. If the family were to ask me to get back involved, I would. But that's the only back involved.
I would imagine there's a lot of bad blood after the lawsuit and everything, so that seems like probably a low likelihood. And I know I always say I'm not going to press you to say anything you don't want to say, and then I kind of press you, but are either of those 2 cases related to an 81-year-old guy who purportedly was suicided from inhaling helium?
No. One case is in North Carolina. It was a teenager, and the other case is out in Nebraska.
Got it.
But one thing I want to say, in what you just said, there's really not a lot of bad blood, Jason, between me and the Rich family. I know there were lawsuits, but I honestly believe Joe Rich and Mary Rich, I don't think they have this horrible feeling about me at all. I really don't. I think they know and they believe I was genuine in what I was doing, even though there were lawsuits. But I just don't think that they really have this real negative feeling towards me at all.
Well, that's good. That's always good to know. Rod, I really appreciate you spending this time with me and answering these questions. I think people are really fascinated by this case because there's just so many things about it that don't seem to make sense. So hopefully new information will come forward and we can continue talking as time allows and as that happens. Is there anything else you want to leave the viewers with before we wrap it up for tonight?
No, just be safe and take care of yourself.
Exactly. Don't go walking in the Bloomingdale neighborhood with your watch and wallet after you've allegedly stolen a thumbnail drive full of emails from the DNC. It seems to be bad for your health. All right, Rod, thanks so much for joining me.
And I appreciate it, Jason.
Wonderful to have you on, and have a great evening and a good weekend. I want to remind everybody that Crowdsource the Truth is a community-sponsored news resource, and I could not be bringing you reports like this without your financial sponsorship. So people can go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become a sponsor. We just did a great broadcast right before this with Kevin Shipp. It's a new series that we started called The Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp, former CIA officer. So that's very interesting. My guest has been Rod Wheeler. And Rod, thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for watching. I'll see everybody tomorrow.